Hello, I'm Paul Mason, and I'm a journalist, and author, and filmmaker. And I'm here with.
And my name is Fintan O'Toole. I'm a columnist with the Irish Times in Dublin, and I also professor of Irish Letters in Princeton.
And you're in Princeton today, aren't you?
I am. I'm here at the moment. Yeah, I will go back onto the campus for physical teaching, although with masks, which is very strange.
Yeah, well, I'm in Pembrokeshire, which is on the west coast of Wales, and when we switch our radio on, we get RTE here. We're closer to Ireland than we are to London. So we're talking about the university and its future and what's wrong with it. Shall we start? I mean, I don't know. It might be a good idea to start by just concretizing it. I went to university in Sheffield, 1978, and then I did a year's postgrad in London and 2 more years in Sheffield postgrad, taking me through to the mid '80s. The thing I thought, the good thing I liked the most about it, there were many good things, but the thing I liked the most about it was I felt part of a community of learning. There were some, sort of medium famous people in the politics department. I did a weird degree called music and politics. And that was because I'd been a musical child, but I got to university and I wanted to switch to politics and they wouldn't let me. So I had to do half and half. And I did feel like I was part of a community of learning with people who were pretty good at their subjects, who introduced us to the absolutely key emerging ideas at the time. I can remember Tom Nairn's book coming out, The Breakup of Britain. That was a big talking point. Palestine, Edward Said was there, visiting. So when I have contact with universities now, that's what I sometimes fear has been lost. You don't have to have the dons sitting at the high table and everybody else, we were little plebs, sitting elsewhere. But to achieve a community, and I do feel that because it's all been commercialized, really what you've got now are providers and clients, which necessarily in a market situation is a different kind of social relationship. I don't know whether we could start by you telling me, which I don't know, where did you go to university and what did you think of it?
So, but I suppose so many people of my generation and even of yours, which would have come after, I was the first person in my entire family tree to ever go to third level education. Second level education had only become free in Ireland a couple of years before I went to secondary school. I suppose like yourself, the idea of the university, the idea of being able to enter this world and having this privilege, where you had a few years of your life where, you were expected to read books and you were expected to sit around drinking coffee and talking about the state of the world, was a fabulous privilege and a real sense of excitement, and frankly, it wasn't, it was very good, but for me, and I think for so many people, the experience was, yes, of course, partly with the courses you were doing and some of the very good teachers. And we had fabulous people like Seamus Dean, the late Seamus Dean, who just recently died, unfortunately, and Dennis Donoghue. And, I was doing English and philosophy. So that was fantastic. But a huge amount of it was really about that, exactly what you say, is a sense of community, and in a way, learning from each other, learning from our own naivete and our own willingness to open ourselves up to all sorts of discussion, all sorts of ideas. And it was very continuous with the other experiences of being a young person, sexual relationships and music and, just finding yourself and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't like that was over there and your educational experience was over there.
No.
I think that was the really important thing. And it's very interesting what you're saying, Paul, about, because I'm in Princeton, which is a really privileged university, very much part of the sort of elite American system. And it's really striking here that for the elites, they've kept going all of those things that are being denied to people in the bulk of the university system now, right? So it's probably parallel to the fact that all the tech gurus in California don't want their kids to be educated online. They want old-fashioned educational experience, and actually, for those who are very privileged and who can afford it or who can kind of somehow navigate the system and get into these elite institutions in America, I mean, actually, the system is very open, really encourages kind of cross-disciplinary stuff. I mean, if I'm teaching, I'm likely to have an engineer and a computer scientist and a biologist and a literary student and a dance major or something, all in the same group, different age groups. They could be first years, they could be fourth years, It's very striking that the very stuff that to call it, I mean, elite is a very loaded word to use now, but the people who are most privileged want for themselves are the very things that are being stripped out, I think, of the general experience. Exactly what you were talking about, this managerialism, isn't it? Where education is seen as a commodity, and therefore the whole relationship between teaching and students is fundamentally altered by that.
Where did you go for your undergraduate degree?
So it was a place called University College Dublin, which was, the sort of less fashionable. It wasn't Sally Rooney's Trinity College; it was the other one, which its history was kind of as a Catholic university, but it was not sectarian at that stage. But it was new. I suppose again, this would have been a very typical experience in England. All the new red brick universities that had opened up. Yeah. So although the university was relatively old, the campus was entirely new, just on the kind of fringes of Dublin. The architecture was new. There was a real sense of this being a new world, it was actually very enjoyable, and that's one of the things I worry about really with the educational experience now is how much fun are people having.
I mean, one of the problems, I mean, even in elite institutions, I was invited to speak to state school students who'd gone to an Oxford college. Okay, so we get there, and it was a really polite meeting, quite dead. Everyone was quite conformist. They were nearly all doing PPE, philosophy, politics, and economics. And but they had made it from relatively disadvantaged backgrounds, and it was polite, staid, and boring until I basically kicked off. Who feels that even now, once they're here, they are basically in a complete lower class, and that's when it blew up, and it was really interesting. They immediately started to get emotional and express that indeed they did feel that once. Despite their incredible pride at getting to this place, having got there, they then looked around them and realized that the actual children of the elite had not only navigated their way in much more easily than them, but they were already navigating their way to the next part of their careers, whether it be a PhD or a scholarship in America or a placement with a bank. And so there's a kind of supply and demand issue for what you might call a holistic education. Talking to these young people about the course they did, I was saying to them, how much history of economics do you do? None, not unless you really want to. So the whole idea of Adam Smith and John Maynard Keynes, is not really high on the agenda. And how much continental philosophy do you do? Not much. And in the politics, they said, is it all about power dynamics that can be measured more or less by algebra? And they say, well, yeah, funnily enough, it is. I said, well, what you're really doing is maths, and maths, isn't it, really? It's a sort of... No, that's what the elite want. And it's become... These places are the functional training grounds for the neoliberal global elite. And they do need to have that knowledge to be able to manipulate a balance sheet, the rest of it, to run a hedge fund or whatever. But what could we do about that? Even if we had access to one benign, holistically minded college at Cambridge, what could we do? Well,
I think you have to start with access. I think it's really fascinating what you're saying about. And I think that's absolutely true that even when you've navigated all of the rocks and whirlpools that you have to get there, there's still this sense of being on the outside, and that points you towards the vast numbers of people who don't. I mean, I think the very first thing we have to put into this whole conversation, it's not a big idea, but I mean, how was it possible in the 1960s and 1970s for people to go to university without paying fees? just that basic thing, and not only not pay fees, but actually have grants, that were that made it possible for people to have some kind of life, to be able to rent a flat, or to be somebody with some kind of independent economic means. Was it because our societies were much wealthier? No, clearly not. These were decisions which were made, and I mean, even if you take within the UK. And then if you include the Republic of Ireland, where I'm from, there are very different models. You don't pay university fees in the Republic of Ireland. You don't pay them in Scotland. Why not? Have those societies collapsed because they can't bear the burden of these things? So those decisions around fees are crucial decisions, because they are themselves then imposing economic metrics. So it's not just that you're learning the metrics, you're also kind of structured, your whole life is structured by those metrics as to whether or not you can meet those standards. In the US where I am, the accumulation of vast debt just simply to get a third level education. So you leave third level education owing $500,000. So of course then that there's a backwash from that, isn't there? Which is that I think, well, okay, I'm spending all this money to get this education. It itself must be measurable, in very strict terms. There must be a quid pro quo, and it must lead me to a career path in which I can justify the expenditure somehow. And I don't know how you feel, Paul, but that those things. I mean, maybe we were just a lot of, wankers, but it never occurred to me no. How am I going to justify this time I'm spending, and I think that is crucial because it feeds back into everything.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a grammar school, and I like you, I was the first person in my family. I was born in 1960, so I'm not that much younger than you. The first person in my family to even go to a quality secondary education. And then university, a red brick, what now would be called a Russell Group University. It was easy financially. I mean, I did run out of money. I mean, I did, I can remember trying to survive on 2 tiny chocolates for 3 days because I wrongly booked my train ticket on the wrong day. So I literally had no money. People listening to this may not realize there were no overdrafts in those days, or you could run out of overdraft. There was no credit card. But I don't want to be too nostalgic about it because, there were downsides, but the educational level, there weren't many downsides compared to now, I would say. You were encouraged to challenge from the very get-go. I mean, obviously, politically, we were very active, so we occupied Sheffield University several times. And I can remember the best of the occupations were when the politics lecturers, including, for example, Andrew Gamble, who's a famous political economist even now, came in and did his lecture in the occupation. So, these things are unthinkable today. They didn't have to hit any market metrics, it does seem bizarre to me. But one of the problems of introducing money and finance into this, it's not only, I think, that it makes students very orientated towards their future career path and the vote. So even something like politics, philosophy, and economics can actually be seen as a vocational course. The concern I have is it makes both sides of the bargain, both the teacher and the student, very aware of the transactional nature of it. And the famous thing, everyone has horror stories about certain kinds of students coming up to them and saying, I don't want to be taught this because it's not relevant to my future career. Or even, you must give me a certain grade because I've paid the full money. I mean, you do hear those kind of things. I mean, those should be easier to deal with. But if that's in there, I mean, it's a symptom of how unhealthy this relationship has become for learning, I think, for pure learning in its abstract sense, which everybody seems to say is like, oh, well, that's a luxury. It isn't. I mean, above all, in the hard sciences, pure abstract learning of principles, of algebraic principles, of methodology in statistics, etc. It's a must. You have to have it to be able to progress beyond sort of master's level. So what could we do to try and sort of de-link or rather lessen the intensity of the link, or the kind of vocational drive and the financialized kind of dynamic of education, and what it could be? Because to answer your question, I don't think we were just a bunch of wankers. I think what we were a very lucky generation that coattailed it in to the 20th century elite system. You know, for those lucky enough to go to Oxbridge, they got into the refectory. You know, they were visited by prime ministers. Wow, you know, bang, there you were. Surely the customers for this, which, you know, who are the customers? The students themselves, their parents, the stakeholders like companies who have to employ them, can see, for example, from a famous example, the quality of debate at the Oxford Union is just is kind of legendarily horrible, deadly right now. But when you go there, you look on the walls, you see the most famous people from the 19th and 20th centuries. What has happened? Can people not make the link between the commercialization of the education and the kind of sudden deadheadedness of everybody who's trying to string two words together in that institution?
I think maybe if we're looking for some sort of optimism, it is that maybe this is a phase which is proving to be self-defeating. You know, so even if you're thinking about elite formation, which is what universities still are, what they absolutely shouldn't be, what the whole kind of social democratic ethic of that post-war era was, that no, this is a universal right. You know, there's a right to an education, and you know, having got rid of that, I mean, that's a whole set of questions that we've been talking about, and it's a bigger political issue. But even within the institutions themselves, I mean, surely there's an increasing sense that this is reaching a crisis. And I think one of the reasons it's reaching a crisis is that is COVID and the pandemic, right? So every third level institution has been through an experience where students who are paying, well, like in the American system, $30, $40, $50, $60,000, you know, are being taught on Zoom, right? And particularly because, of course, a huge part of this economic model is the attraction of foreign students, and particularly Asian students. So the students who used to come from China, you know, and pay these vast fees because their parents can afford it, well, they're still in Shanghai, and they're sitting in the same desk, and they're looking at stuff on Zoom. And so this is where the commercial model becomes sort of rebounds on itself, right? Which is they start saying, why am I paying this amount of money for that? You know, and then the university has to say, no, but what you're really paying for is the experience and the community and, you know, all the other things that go around the direct experience of what a class is. And I think it's reached this point of absurdity where you can't have it both ways, right? So what is it? So even within a commercial logic, what is it you're paying for, right? Well, actually, what COVID has said is it's not really this fantastic experience of being, you know, very close to these famous teachers and, you know, getting this marvelous wisdom. That could be done online to a large. Like I remember a colleague of mine saying, you know, that the real horror for universities wasn't that the Zoom thing didn't work; it was that it did work. You know, that if it's purely pragmatic, transactional, if that's what it's about, then actually, you know, let's forget about universities altogether. Let's do all the courses online. Let's have them open, the massive online, open course, whatever. Yeah. Let's all just do that. And so I think that there is a real crisis in universities to be forced to say, well, actually, what, even in strictly commercial terms, what is the product? What are we offering? Right? And realizing, well, actually, the product is all the other stuff. You know, the product is the interaction of students with each other primarily. The interaction of students with teachers, the atmosphere, all those kind of intangible things that are about, you know, the privilege of being in a certain place at a certain time, which shapes your life in ways that are not to do with, you know, when am I going to get into Goldman Sachs, you know, but are actually to do with what's the quality of my relationships, what's the quality of my self-knowledge, what's the quality of my connection with the outside world. You know, and I mean, talking to students, like I did all my courses online last year, like everybody else did, and talking to students about like, what did you miss? Well, none of them actually said, we really missed having you in the room. They also, I really miss being able to do my dance thing or my theatre thing or the debates, the politics stuff. And actually, a lot of students said things that they miss, like stuff that they really, really, really don't get paid for, like going and teaching in prisons, which a lot of them do, volunteering.
Really? Okay.
So I think we're at a moment of crisis for the universities themselves, which is this model isn't going to work over the long term. So maybe that crisis is healthy, where it actually draws us back into the sense of what would you do. And I mean, I think in terms of what would you do, I think you're right that, both of us are older and we probably should listen more to younger people and that rather than telling them how great it was in the 1960s and 70s and drive them crazy. But I don't think it's hugely mysterious as to how a good educational experience unfolds, and it is through high expectations. You're as good as anybody else. You have the right to have access to all the great thinking that's ever been done in the world in whatever field. It's to do with cross-disciplinary experiences, where you have people coming from different educational and subject backgrounds. It's to do with all kind of Socratic methods of, what do you think?
Yeah.
Tell me how you're responding to this, those sort of attitudes. Again, a huge amount of this is also to do with not exploiting younger teachers. I think this is a thing we haven't really talked about, but, part of the managerial commercial model is also a sort of reinforcement of elites within academia. So there were always these elites, but the gap now between the superstar professor and the adjunct, who's being brought in to, teach courses and with no security, no guarantee of a job and poor wages and conditions very often, how is somebody going to teach? So, you were talking about the pressure of I want an A. Well, I can say, piss off, you're not getting an A, because the worst they can do to me is fire me or whatever, and I'm fine, I've got other things.
Yeah.
But if I was a 28, 30-year-old postdoc, I can't afford to do that. I just can't. I'm terrified. These are my customers and I better keep them happy. And there's going to be an evaluation of me. And if that evaluation isn't good, then so economic security for teachers is actually a huge part of this as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it is, it hasn't occurred to me that how much of a crisis the model is in. I mean, obviously, the more it's dependent on money, and in America it is, the more a crisis is going to be felt. Obviously, some continental European systems still retain aspects of that old, free, at the point of view, so relatively free ethos. You can imagine the whole system bifurcating because neoliberal economics being what it is, Trump, of course, was in the end fined, wasn't he, for setting up Trump University. But actually, if you think about it, he was onto something because a cut price, absolutely abysmal university, run like a MOOC, kind of almost like Mr. Burns in The Simpsons University. You can see that being one of the outcomes from this crisis. So assuming we don't want that, what could we do? What if you were able to think laterally in an expansive way about what the possibilities were? I mean, one of the questions that we've been asked to think about is how can the work of the body, it says here, of craft, skill and feeling become realized as areas of value in the university? Should the creative act complement critical inquiry? Blah, blah, blah. No, I did a dual degree into music and politics, and the music aspect of that was a very traditional conservatoire style, composition, composing, instrumental playing and musicology. And I think, like a lot of music faculties, and increasingly the big music schools, they are separate. I mean, for example, Guildhall, I think, is in London, is technically part of London University. The Royal College of Music is technically part of that, but they are separate. and the students within them live very separate lives. It's the same with Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, which I've done a small amount of work at. I have a big feeling that the conservatoire needs to get off its arse a bit and kind of re-enter the world of general learning, because what they're not getting is they're not getting a ton of data scientists saying to them stuff. They're not getting the more general humanities, the kind of methodological debates, structuralism, post-structuralism, and beyond in the humanities. I don't know what you think about that. Could there be a way of integrating more what the different specialisms that higher education has come to embody?
I couldn't agree more, Paul. I think it's obvious that higher education has to involve a degree of specialization, right? So you are following some kind of a path, and that makes complete sense. But again, it's very interesting to look at what do the elite institutions afford to the privileged? Well, what they afford to the privileged is exactly what you're talking about, right? So, where I am now, I'm in a building where, like, just there is a theatre studio. Behind me is a dance studio. Over there, there are theatres which are like way better than most of the professional theatres in Dublin in terms of equipment. Behind that, there are concert rooms, rehearsal rooms. These are for students. These are not for for professional. By the way, these are not courses in
no
music or drama. So it's not, I want to be an actor. This is where I go. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, what the privileged can buy for their kids. Right? Yeah. It's an education which is integrated, right? Which says it's expected of you. It's not just okay. It's actually expected of you that you're doing computer engineering, but you're also trying to, do your experimental dance piece, or the physicality, like sport is enormous. Yeah. Now that's also becomes kind of problematic, where the only form of physicality is sport. Yeah. But nonetheless, those are 19th century ideals of integrated education are alive and well, but they're alive and well for the privileged, and there was a nun in Ireland who set up primary schools in the 19th century, but her motto was "Give free to the poor what the rich will pay for." And it's never a bad place to start in societies to think about. Well, actually, what do the people with money and privilege want for themselves and their kids? Because that's usually a fairly good standard, and the whole thrust really should be to say that should be generalized. Absolutely, and sort of. I was writing a piece when Charlie Watts died recently, the Rolling Stones drummer, and it just kind of struck me. If you look at every single great English rock band of the 1960s, every single one of them had at least one dosser who went to art school, right? The Rolling Stones, the Beatles, the Pink Floyd, to go on and on and on. You could argue that the greatest example of British soft power, maybe one of the greatest examples of soft power, full stop, we've ever seen, right? It's this extraordinary moment when Britain, a declinist narrative from the 1950s, is replaced by swinging London, the hippest place in the world, the most creative place in the world, mostly through the rock bands, right? And most of those rock bands were very, very, very tied in with the art schools. And the art schools are really interesting, right? Because the art schools were a managerialist nightmare. They were really easy to get into. The standards of entry were very, very low. Look at John Lennon's drawings, for example. They're bloody awful. He couldn't draw. Didn't matter. They were. There was a realization that actually, well, first of all, you have to have a place for people who are not comfortable in the mainstream educational system, and then gradually a realization. Oh, look at all the stuff that's coming out of these places. Now managerialism and neoliberalism will never do that. They can't do it, because what you were talking about, like when everything becomes mathematics and the algorithms at work, none of it makes sense. None of it makes sense whatsoever. It's the stuff that comes out of these places. So institutions like the one I'm in at the moment, right, they don't teach film much. It produces dozens of great film directors, So it's experiential side of it that's so crucial. And I think this is where absolutely the kind of creative and artistic side, the physical skills, also the social skills. I mean, again, very interesting. One of the things that these elite institutions emphasize is volunteering. As I was saying, that an idea that students actually shouldn't be just on the campus all the time, but it's expected of them. Just a very simple question, like if you were a kid in Ireland or Britain now and you wanted to get into one of the Ivy League institutions in America, right, how would you do it? How would you work back? Right? You would say, I'm going to have to show that I'm really good at volunteering and all sorts of stuff. I'm going to have to be involved in sport or physical activity of some kind. I'm going to have some kind of creative thing. They're not that interested in your SATs or, the kind of metrics, because they've got loads. Everybody's got that, And they're in the privileged position of being able to say, well, actually, Paul is a really interesting guy. Look at the other stuff he's done in his life. Wouldn't it be great to have somebody like him on campus? Now, I'm not saying you can or should try to reproduce that everywhere, but it is pointing us towards the elites knowing what a good education looks like for their kids, and these things are not. This is not utopian. This is perfectly possible. One thing, I'm sure you want to come back to this, but I think, again, the economics of this is kind of absolutely crucial. Every single child who is born should have a fund, an educational fund established by the state, which can be spent over the course of their lifetime. And let's say it's set at the level of what a primary degree from a university would be. But then, right, it's possible for that person, as they develop, to maybe not go to university at 18, maybe go at 25, or not go to university at all, but go to an art college, or go, if you actually applied some sort of what capitalism pretends to believe, right, which is the actual customer, really actually do make the citizen the customer with choices about how they use their allocation of resources. It would be a huge thing in terms of social justice, because you would give equal amount of money to everybody. It'd be a huge stimulus for people to further their education, I think, to kind of say, well, I've got this fund. The state's telling me, by the way, you still have £25,000 unspent in your fund. What do you want to do with it? But also, I think it would revolutionize education as well, in terms of people having real choices about the mix of things that they would like to do.
I think that's fascinating. Here in the United Kingdom, of course, we have this system of fees. Almost very few people get kind of subsidized grant style income. It's a sort of bleak system. I mean, I don't have a huge amount of contact with it. Technically, I'm a visiting professor at Wolverhampton, but I don't have a lot of contact with the teaching world of students. I visit and turn up and talk in what used to be lectures on those Zoom calls. But it does feel, the aspect of the economic relationship is only one aspect. One of the other things, we're running out of time, but they wanted us to talk about how do we defend the university from the right? Because, I don't know if you have ever come across Mencius Moldbug, Curtis Yarvin, the kind of right-wing blogger who speaks about the university and the media. So we are both part of that, as speaking ex cathedra and being unjustified sources of intellectual power. So the right is really going for the university, and what it's going for above all through things like racist pseudoscience and misogynist pseudoscience is peer review. So we want to defend that, but how do we defend it without defending a kind of mechanistic commercialism? I don't know whether you got any ideas about that in about 5 minutes.
Well, it's very difficult. I think, we have to be pragmatic, and we have to say, you first of all have to defend the ground. And I think you and I would say the ground itself has to change, and the arena has to be redefined. But defending the idea of the existence of independent institutions, however flawed they are, is absolutely crucial to any kind of democratic society. But the best way that people who are involved in universities can defend themselves actually is by being better at operating in public. They have to be able to stimulate public discourse. They have to believe in such a thing as the public realm and that they're part of it. If they retreat into a mechanistic commercialized world, then again, it's self-defeating. This is where the crisis is. It's just, you're just killing yourself. It's suicidal.
Yeah. I mean, I think we have to wrap up, but my thing would be, I would make publicly funded research a public good.
Yes.
I mean, whether it's in science or medieval history, it would just be great as a non-academic to not have to pay those JSTOA fees as I'm researching my books. It would just be great to have the public knowledge of the world